This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about BlackRock and the Bitcoin circular economy, and this is in response to a question from Flinders MJ. How does BlackRock's application for in-kind transfers tie into all these new custodian plays? Does it mean that I can transfer BTC from my wallet to Wells Fargo without triggering a tax event? It's a great question. He's referring, of course, to IBIT, which is the BlackRock spot Bitcoin ETF, as well as the other spot Bitcoin ETFs. And what's happening is that the NASDAQ, in place of BlackRock, has filed with the SEC to ask them to allow for what's called in-kind transfers of the trust Bitcoin. So we're going to talk about how this works and how ETFs work in general. How ETFs work in general is institutions buy the underlying asset, whether it's stocks or bonds or oil or gold or Bitcoin, and then they issue shares against it. So for example, when you buy an oil ETF, you're getting price exposure to the underlying asset. It should track the underlying asset. There's an arbitrage that ensures that the ETF will track the underlying asset. So let me give you a simplified example using a hypothetical Bitcoin, spot Bitcoin ETF. This is not how they're actually sized, but let's say we have a spot Bitcoin ETF where one share of XYZ, this spot Bitcoin ETF, is backed by a full Bitcoin. And let's say the price of Bitcoin is currently at 100,000 and the price of one share of this ETF, which is backed by one Bitcoin, let's say the price of one share is trading at a slight discount at 99,000 per share. So here's the arbitrage. If you're an institutional trader, you short one Bitcoin at $100,000 and then you buy one share of XYZ at $99,000. If nothing goes wrong operationally, and there are things that can go wrong, but if nothing goes wrong, you are perfectly hedged. If Bitcoin goes up a lot, you'll lose money on the BTC short, but you'll make money on the XYZ long. And then if Bitcoin goes down a lot, you'll lose money on your XYZ long, but you'll make money on your BTC short. And when a lot of people put on the same spread trade, what it does is it drives the price of Bitcoin slightly lower, the price of XYZ slightly higher, thus causing the prices to converge so that one share of XYZ will now trade probably close to 100,000, or the price of Bitcoin will come down a little bit to meet it. So that's how arbitrage works. And global arbitrage across exchanges, P2P exchanges, as well as OTC desks, helps to keep the price of Bitcoin close to the same everywhere on Earth. Global arbitrage across Bitcoin ETFs, spot Bitcoin ETFs, Bitcoin futures ETFs, etc., and Bitcoin itself helps to keep their prices in line as well. So there's this global arbitrage across all these different assets. They're usually market makers or other institutional players that create new chunks of the ETF. This is called the creation process for ETF shares. So for example, if they were doing this for a spot Bitcoin ETF, they might buy $10 million worth of Bitcoin, deposit it at Coinbase custody, and then be able to issue $10 million of new shares of IBIT that's backed by that $10 million of Bitcoin. For the BlackRock spot Bitcoin ETF, these players, these institutional players who do this, who create new shares and redeem old shares, these players are called Authorized Participants. And what's pretty funny is that Jamie Dimon, even though he hates Bitcoin, he still supports Bitcoin through JP Morgan being an authorized participant for IBIT. So pay attention not just to what people say, but to what they do. And all the major too big to fail banks now are authorized participants for the BlackRock spot ETF. Here is when JP Morgan is mentioned, that JP Morgan is one of the 9 APs or authorized participants. If you're enjoying this video so far, finding it helpful so far, I just ask you to help to support this channel's educational mission. Hit the subscribe button. That really helps a lot. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video. You see how much I like to use these comments in future videos. That really does help the channel. Also, share this video with a friend or family member. So when it comes to shares of ETFs, there are two kinds of redemptions. There's cash redemptions. Give JP Morgan, as an authorized participant, $10 million worth of IBIT, and they will give you $10 million worth of USD cash. Or in-kind redemptions, give JP Morgan $10 million worth of IBIT, and they'll give you $10 million of Bitcoin itself. So that would be an in-kind redemption where you can exchange the shares of the ETF directly for the asset itself rather than just getting dollars. Creating new shares of IBIT and redemptions of IBIT are handled only by authorized participants under current law. So this rule change, if it in fact happens, will not directly affect retail investors. You will not be able, at least at this stage, to be able to exchange your IBIT for Bitcoin directly, which would be very nice if you could do it in a tax efficient way and not trigger a capital gains tax. You'll still be able to sell your IBIT inside of your brokerage account for cash, but you won't be able to exchange it directly for real BTC. But here's the thing, authorized participants like Goldman and JP Morgan and those other 7 APs will be able to exchange IBIT directly for Bitcoin. So why is this important? Number one, it simplifies and streamlines the workflow by eliminating the forced conversion of BTC to US dollars every single time an AP processes a redemption. This almost certainly saves some fees and commissions as well, so it makes the whole trust or the whole ETF structure more efficient. Number two, it's important because it eliminates some capital gains, which the ETF would be forced to distribute to shareholders who might then owe some capital gains taxes on it, usually small amounts for an ETF like this, and it looks like they've never done a distribution. At least historically, this fund does not have any distributions. It's not to say something could happen where they do a small trade as part of this arbitrage, and somehow it triggers a tax event, and there's a distribution, and owners of the spot ETF of IBIT have to pay a small amount of taxes on that. And so if they're just redeeming for Bitcoin, you may not have this issue. Number three, perhaps most importantly, it could decrease selling pressure on BTC, since authorized participants can receive BTC directly without being forced to first sell it for US dollars. And in some sense, which is why I gave this episode the title that it has, in some sense this creates a miniature Bitcoin circular economy here, where movement, at least for the authorized participants, where movement between IBIT and BTC becomes more seamless and doesn't need to reference the US dollar directly, apart of course from the share price of IBIT, which is still denominated in US dollars. So this becomes even more powerful when combined with the rescission of SAB 121 we talked about a couple days ago. SAB 121 under the Biden administration and Gary Gensler's SEC made it much more difficult for U.S. banks to custody Bitcoin, as I spoke about in this video, which I'll link to in the description notes below. But the summary of it is that now that SAB 121 has been rescinded, every U.S. bank that desires will now be able to custody Bitcoin and offer Bitcoin services to clients in a more capital efficient way. So it'll be very funny to see your angry uncle from Thanksgiving when he goes to JP Morgan next year and he sees all these Bitcoin products everywhere after he's been telling you that it's a scam and a pyramid scheme for the past 10 years at the Thanksgiving table. Soon, authorized participants in the spot Bitcoin ETFs will be able to easily hold the BTC received from ETF share redemptions. Think about that. Either hold it for themselves or for their customers. So I think all the pieces are coming together here thanks to Trump's election. The Biden administration and Gary Gensler really did everything they could to fight against in-kind redemptions, which also probably tells you everything you need to know about why bringing back in-kind redemptions is good news. This is where BlackRock caved in December 18th, 2023. Looks like BlackRock has caved to the SEC's demands to exclude in-kind creations and redemptions from their spot Bitcoin ETF. So this was always intended to be there, and it was really Gary Gensler's fault that it was not in the initial launch of IBIT. So we're basically trying to bring it back to where it would have been if we didn't have to deal with Gary Gensler. At some point, individual retail investors may even be able to move seamlessly between IBIT and BTC inside their brokerage accounts, and this will become easier as these large U.S. banks begin to set up custody for Bitcoin so they can actually hold it for customers. So you can imagine, this isn't here yet, but you could imagine moving your BTC to Schwab, converting it to IBIT, taking a margin loan against it or writing calls against it, or any other number of financial moves. Now that's not something that I'm personally interested in doing, but lots of other people certainly will be. And anything that increases the liquidity or ease of convertibility or integrates Bitcoin more tightly into the financial system and the economy is a good thing, even if more cypherpunky Bitcoiners like you and I are not always delighted with who's using Bitcoin or how it's being used. This is still how hyper-Bitcoinization takes place. Bitcoin makes its way into every nook and cranny of the global financial system. While we're on the subject of a circular Bitcoin economy as it applies to individuals like you and me, here's another thought. In the future, and even today, you can live on a Bitcoin standard. And on a Bitcoin standard, you won't buy BTC, you'll earn it. You won't sell BTC for fiat. Instead, you'll spend it for goods and services, all of which will take place increasingly without reference to fiat, like the US dollar. So you'll be earning Bitcoin, you'll be spending Bitcoin, and the fiat price of it will become less and less relevant. You'll even begin to think in Bitcoin. In other words, use Bitcoin as a unit of account. And so you'll have a rough idea how much does a car cost, how much does a dozen eggs cost in sats or in Bitcoin, just like you can make that estimate very easily today for US dollars or whatever fiat currency you use. Now, obviously, eliminating the US capital gains tax on spending Bitcoin would help a lot to jumpstart this Bitcoin circular economy, which is why I've mentioned on this channel many times I'm encouraging Trump to eliminate all capital gains taxes on Bitcoin. It's just unfair to tax money. It doesn't even make sense to tax money. So I would encourage you to take into account this idea of a circular Bitcoin economy. Try to begin to move your family more and more onto a Bitcoin standard. See if you can start earning Bitcoin from your employer or from side hustles, and then see if you can start spending it using the BTC map, for example, to find merchants, etc. You'll see on my homepage of my site where I have all my paid material, I have the option for people to pay with Bitcoin. Sometimes people ask me whether I have this option. If you just click here, you can sign up for my courses and for the Bitcoin forum and the Bitcoin live classes, etc. And you can pay using Bitcoin. You just put your email address in here, and it will allow you, thanks to the company Zappright, which provides this app. It's a really cool app. It will allow you to pay $69, which is a discount to what you pay if you pay fiat, which is $79. But it'll allow you to pay fiat. It will allow you to pay $69 worth of Bitcoin either on chain or over Lightning, whatever works best for you. So this is my small part trying to find different ways to convert the earning of US dollars into the earning of Bitcoin and sort of move myself and my family more and more onto a Bitcoin standard. So that's the general context. I think we should see the rescission of SAB 121, the increasing ability of US banks to hodl Bitcoin, as well as in-kind redemptions coming almost certainly for IBIT. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video, and let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.